Welcome to our weekly roundtable discussion by Law Enforcement Coaching, where each week we have unscripted conversations on relevant topics for law enforcement and our first responder community. This week we discuss ways to process grief and loss. We appreciate you tuning in and hope you find some useful insights and information from these discussions.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us again. We are here on our weekly roundtable with some of our coaches, and I'll let you guys introduce yourselves briefly, and then we are going to talk about processing grief and loss this week. So before we jump into that, Mike, I will have you start with a quick introduction.
Sure. My name's Mike Lawson. I did almost 24 years with the San Diego Sheriff's Department. I retired for a little bit and then got picked up by Chula Vista Police Department, and I am their wellness coordinator for their police department and their professional staff.
Awesome. Greg?
Hi, thanks for letting me be here. A retired sergeant from Maricopa County and 31 years and chief of staff at Law Enforcement Coaching. So,
perfect. And then Chris and I are the founders and CEO of Law Enforcement Coaching, and you can check out everything about us on our website. With that, let's just jump into the topic. I will start this off. One of the reasons that we chose this topic is because Chris, and Greg too, we lost a dear friend of ours this past week to cancer. And so we thought it was appropriate that we just have a unscripted conversation about processing grief and loss. And it doesn't always have to be super heavy. Sometimes it is. And we're going to dedicate this episode to Mike Olson, one of the most amazing human beings you could have ever met. And I'm probably going to cry on this one, but we'll keep going. So for you guys, I learned I had to process grief early. My dad was diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer when I was 11. They gave him 6 months to live. Best case scenario, he fought and lived for 7 years in complete remission. But then we had to make the decision to take him off life support when I was 18. So I had to grow up really fast and process and learn about death from that. For me with that, because he had got that extra time, it was really, really stressful and sad up until that point. But then after he passed, for me, it was just like a sigh of relief and knowing that he was at peace. And I've been at peace with it ever since. What are your guys' experiences with losing close friends or family?
well, I just recently in the last few weeks lost an uncle, a very close uncle. And I know in the line of duty, I've lost 3 friends. One was hit by a drunk driver on a traffic stop, and the other 2 were shot. And those hits are really hard. They're so unexpected. Well, most death is, but those tend to hit you really hard, especially when they're out serving the community and they're your friends, and they back you up on a call 1 minute and the next minute it's over. And so those can tend to be, I think, particularly difficult, especially in law enforcement, for people to get past.
And did your department do anything to help you guys through, or how did you figure out how to process or grieve?
I think it was just through my religious beliefs and just I lean very heavily on that. The department did not then, and I don't know if they do now, offer any kind of counseling or assistance. And we're back into the stereotype that you don't want to say anything because you don't want to look weak, and you don't want to risk your career position because you look weak. And so you just you funnel it, you push it down and try to get by. And that's never the best way to do it. That's always the worst.
And Mike or Chris, which one? I know, Chris, you've lost several people, but Mike,
how about you?
Yeah, so, I've lost some grandparents, but in 2010, one of my good friends, sheriff friend of mine, died in the line of duty. And he was chasing a wrong way driver and just went off part of the freeway and didn't make it. And then a few years after that, one of my favorite supervisors, that was my sergeant, lieutenant, captain, She committed suicide. And then a few years after that, kind of back-to-back years, two close friends that I worked with both committed suicide. So I kind of dealt with all those different ways, some good, some not so good. So we could discuss that as we go further.
Yeah, throughout not just my career, but my life, I've experienced loss. In my teenage years, I was thinking about this, my teenage years, I lost three friends of mine who committed suicide, all, firearms related. And, in my career, four of my friends were killed in the line of duty. And then, when I was on the homicide unit, my partner, Debbie, she went in for a surgery, and it wasn't a big deal, the surgery. She sent us a text saying she's going into surgery, but don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. And something happened in that surgery where she passed away. And I was in the middle of a crime scene when I got the word that she'd passed away. And then now most recently with my buddy Mike passing away. Thinking back on all of that, every situation has always been different. There's a different way of dealing with it in what I went through, because you have, in some cases, it's a sudden loss. You didn't expect this to happen, right? That's a little different than with Mike, what Mike went through with cancer and battling cancer for 4 years, and especially seeing the last year of what he went through. He wasn't the same person, though he kept that positive attitude and would always joke and laugh, even though he was in pain. He didn't really want others to know how much pain he was in, but I could see it. We all could. And so when he passed away, in a way, it was kind of a relief. And I hate to say that, but he's no longer in pain. It's the way I look at it. So I kind of felt a little guilty, thinking that. Nobody wants we don't want our friends to leave us, our loved ones to leave us. But in this case, it was like, it's okay. It's okay that he left because he's no longer in pain. So I really had to put those emotions in check, not to feel guilty about it, right? Just look at the times that we had here and how much fun we had, because we had a lot of good times and we had a lot of fun. And so I try to focus on that when I think about Mike, and just moving on with life in a positive way and helping others, because I know that's how Mike would have wanted it. So Tami, I'll throw it back to you.
Okay, I'm gonna be a wreck for this one. It's okay to cry. We'll put that out there, man or woman. You need to be able to process this. Chris and I both have very different ends of the spectrum of our thing. I have a very girly, you can't have flowers without rain or rainbows without rain. I have a foo-foo, like feminine one for crying. He has a much more masculine. You want to talk about your
my what? What are you talking about?
That it's okay to cry.
Yeah, it is okay to cry. I mean, we all grieve differently, everybody. And in some cases, you're going to see somebody like Tami over here crying, and then you might see this other person, or like me. Why am I not crying? Am I grieving the wrong way? Well, no. We just all have our different ways of grieving. I may go and isolate for a little bit and kind of just have my own thoughts to myself, and that's okay, as long as I don't get trapped in that isolation, for days, months, or even years, right? So we all grieve differently, and there's nothing wrong with crying. The one thing I always tell people, if this is what you were alluding to, Tami, is for those of you that are in like tactical positions where you're going to go serve a search warrant, or you're going to go serve some high risk operation, it's oftentimes you're going to see SWAT operators in the bathroom. We call it having a battle dump, right? We all have to go to the bathroom before we go into this scary situation. And it's kind of that fight or flight thing. Our bodies we're preparing ourselves for that life and death situation. So one of the things that we do is our bodies will get rid of everything that it doesn't need. So we will go to the bathroom. And so it's not uncommon to actually have a battle dump before you go do this. And you got to think about it. When we cry, it's our eyes are doing kind of essentially the same thing. We're we're doing this battle dump of the eyes. Those tears are getting rid of those emotions that we've been holding on for years. We don't need this anymore. And that's our body's way of saying we need to get rid of it. You've been carrying this around with you for years. It's time to get rid of it. And so we begin to cry. And what happens when we cry? Those tears go down our face. What happens? They evaporate. They go away. So this is how I explain to my clients and also for myself. When I cry, it's okay to cry. In my own private practice, my hypnotherapy practice, I don't have Kleenex in my office, because if a client begins to cry, I'm not going to offer them a Kleenex, because if I do, they're going to stop crying. And I don't want somebody to stop crying until they're ready to stop crying. So I'll never offer Kleenex to anybody that's crying. I'd rather them just cry themselves out. So.
All right, we're back in. We had a little bit of a Mercury retrograde technical difficulty glitch, but we are here, and we're going to just keep going with the conversation. And we have Cory, who just joined us. So Cory, I'm going to have you introduce yourself. Give us just a little bit of your background, please.
Yeah, my name is Cory Sack. I have just coming up on 20 years of law enforcement, working, with the police in a related patrol, and have dealt with a lot of grief and loss and mind day, and I think I've done pretty well at managing it.
And we were just sharing how we've lost friends and family. We've had some in the line of duty. We've had some suicide. What has your experience been with losing people close to you?
My real big one was my mom back in 2014. I didn't really know how life would continue on and had not dealt with loss of someone that close to me. So really, I just fell apart. I wasn't there for my family. I wasn't there for my work, and I wasn't there for myself. So using alcohol to really numb a lot of that.
Okay, so you went down that rabbit hole, and then
down that rabbit hole.
What did you do to get yourself out of it or get some help? Did you have somebody that was external, like seeing, hey, you need some help, or did you figure that out?
Oh, yeah, definitely external. Definitely the support of my family and friends, really pointing out that I wasn't dealing with it the right way. And then going in and getting therapy and really realizing that I was having the issues, and that I needed to take care of that to continue to be healthy. So through that process, I did learn that life does move on after a loss.
And now, so that was 2014, you said. So now, have you learned some really more solid coping mechanisms or healthier coping mechanisms?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Exercise was a big one. Therapy was a real big one. And just voicing what's on my mind on feeling that grief, having someone that you can check in with and share some of that with.
And before we had our little glitch, we were just talking about that it's okay to cry. Before you went to therapy, did you allow yourself to cry?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think crying's a big part of my recovery from grief. I think you have to get that out. And so, yeah, that's huge.
Awesome. And what about the rest of you guys? We'll just talk about the crying because we're on that, but did you guys allow yourself, or do you guys allow yourself to cry, or do you still kind of hold that in as like a last resort?
Well, sorry about that, Mike.
Go ahead.
I come from a crying family, so that's what we do, and it's deep in our genes, and it's on my mom's side of the family, and we are big criers, and I got my share of that crying gene. So you allow yourself to cry and try to process it now. Like I was saying from before, I think that was just something that I had to learn on my own, and then eventually talking to other people and finally talking it out and having those discussions to let yourself just let go and get through those difficult times.
Mike, what were you going to say?
Yeah, for me, again, my friend died in the line of duty 2010. And when my captain committed suicide, I organized kind of a station debrief. And I thought I was fine. I was organizing it. People were sad. And then when we started kind of going around the room, when I started to share, not only about my captain, just thoughts and stuff, but all the stuff that I didn't deal with when my friend passed away came up, and it just hit me so hard. And I needed that release, that cry. I didn't realize I needed it. It was huge. That was like kind of the first step to open my eyes to how important debriefs are and how important it is to get it out, to talk to someone, to be with other people, knowing that you're not alone. And the crying part was huge for me. And I definitely tried to hold it in all those years, and that didn't work very well.
And I think that's a really good point, that a lot of time when we are in the process, we can have a logical grip. Like we can come to terms, like when my dad passed, I understood because I'd watched what happened. And very similarly, like our friend Mike, who just passed, I watched my dad slowly deteriorate. So when he passed, I thought I was okay. It wasn't until a few years later that I had, because I had kind of jumped into a relationship around the same time that he passed. So I went in from a grief into a happiness. But when that relationship disintegrated a couple years later, I took that breakup way too hard, and I didn't know why. And I realized I was now 3 years later grieving my dad, grieving everything else that had happened, and it all kind of compounded onto me. And I misunderstood. Like, I thought it was because of here, but I was like, no, it's all of these other things. So things can kind of sneak up on us if we don't really truly process in the moment. Chris, were you going to say something?
Well, I mean, yeah, they can sneak up on us if we don't grieve properly, we don't release, things that we're holding in. And, thinking back on my career, I did 23 years, my 13th year and my 18th year, I almost resigned. And because everything was just becoming too much. And it wasn't until I was teaching in Washington State, actually not too long ago, when it dawned on me that, wait, what significant things happened my 13th year and my 18th year? Well, my 13th year, right around there, my buddy Eric, he was a lieutenant with our agency. He was shot and killed in the line of duty. And then what happened my 18th year? Well, my mentor, my partner, Debbie, died in surgery. And I never put the two together, that kind of triggered things when I didn't process their loss properly. And because I didn't do that, things just kind of snowballed out of control for me. Looking back now, I recognize it. At the time, I didn't recognize it. But it was just, it was interesting to think back and then realize, wow, these two significant things happened to me around that time period where I almost just quit. And so I attributed their loss and not properly releasing that grief to just becoming overwhelmed.
So for all of you, Greg, I've already asked you this, but when you have an in the line of duty death, did your departments we've talked about peers before, but you have chaplains, did you guys talk to anybody, or did anybody seek you out in your departments to help you?
Yeah, so for mine, my friend had gone to a different station, and me and the other people that worked at my station that were really good friends with him, it kind of pissed us off because his new station kind of got, I don't want to say all the glory, but like they got all the resources and they got all these things. And we were like, hey, what about us? And we kind of got forgotten. So to answer a question, ours was not handled that great, but I think I guess I'll blame it on, it's a big department. But yeah, we definitely felt like we were out of the loop as far as resources and just that being together. We did go to Washington, D.C. for the Peace Officer Memorial later that year. And that helped a lot just to be around other people. And it was good to go and just be there with each other. So yeah, I guess it was handled not great at first, but I feel like sending us to the Peace Officer Memorial, both in Sacramento and Washington, D.C., kind of gave us some closure for us.
Cory, what about you?
So I haven't had anyone directly within my department pass away, but people that I've ran calls with and stuff from other departments. And even going into the incident where I was shot, really what I'm getting to is the whole crying piece. I think early in my career, definitely you would hide it, you'd walk away, you would ignore any kind of situation where you might show tears, to where now I'll have a conversation about anything, and if it starts to bring in the tears, I just let it roll. I don't try to hold it back. Maybe if it's someone that I'm not comfortable with or I don't really know, I could see myself leaving that situation. But when it comes to the crying and letting it out in any situation, whether you're alone or you're with a group, I think it's very important to just roll with those feelings, because I think if you hold them back and even try to hold them back to where you deal with them at night instead of the 1 o'clock in the afternoon during your meeting, I think it has a negative impact. So for me, the crying part has been just roll with it. You can't hold it back.
And then I don't want to gloss over, since this is your first introduction with the roundtables, but you survived being shot. So when that situation happened, did your department do a debrief, or was there support for your situation?
No, it was handled very poorly. There was no debrief for well over a year. And there's, the supervisor that ran the scene. I've seen the falling out and his demotion. There's a lot that goes with it when there's no formal debrief. So I've seen the falling out from that.
Man, I feel like we need to have like 80 conversations of roundtables on the importance of debriefing. I'm going to reshare that one again. We'll keep talking about that. Hopefully the departments are watching this and understanding, hey, whether somebody passes or not, we need to be doing more conversation within the department to support. Also leading in, because we have social media, we have the news, and everything is very much in our face. Back in the day, if you had something happen locally, you would hear about it. If there was something major, it would hit the news. But otherwise, we were all kind of isolated to our places where it's like, okay, we could go, months or years with not having any hearing of an officer involved shooting or anything like that. Now, like, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm very active on all of the social media platforms, and we're connected in with all of these different first responder communities. And it's if not daily, it's at least weekly that there is a loss within the first responder community. So it's a lot. So does that stuff, when you see a officer that was shot or whatever happened, does that trigger you guys, or how are you guys processing the ongoing?
It's funny that you bring that up. Some will really catch your eye and you grab onto it and you're like, wow, I really feel the connection with those two guys in Tennessee that got shot. And then there's others where it goes right over your head. And I don't know where that connection or feeling comes from with those stories that come out, but some grab you harder than others.
Yeah, Tami, I was thinking about that when you asked that. There was a time, and I forget when it was, but there was a period where we were wearing a black band over our sheriff badge for almost a year. Like, we literally did not take it off. And, I look back early in my career, like, usually it was somebody within the county or the state, but then something, and I think it was a good thing, but we were wearing it all the time. And obviously it has to get authorized. You just couldn't just wear it on your own. But, yeah, I mean, command would pick certain ones, but a lot of the national ones, we were wearing it. And again, the local ones, we always do for California, San Diego area. But man, I don't exactly know when the years were, but I remember in the locker room, we had those conversations where we're like, man, we haven't taken this off for months. It was crazy.
And what warrants the agency to support it and not support it? It's just like me reading the story. Why does it grab the attention sometimes and why does it not? We're all equal. We're all the same.
Yeah. Then it got into that, like, say you didn't wear it or you didn't have a band. I mean, we always had tons of bands just because lots of these things would happen. But yeah, you're right. It's just, I don't know, it kind of got overwhelming. It went both ways. Like we paid respect, but at the same time, it was kind of like a downer. Like, and people, professional staff would ask us like, "Oh, geez, wait, why are you wearing the band?" And then you ask it, and then they bring it up, and then, so yeah, you're right, Tami. It could kind of reintroduce some trauma that, maybe you don't know that particular officer, but it brings up, trauma from your past.
Good point.
Well, okay, so I want to do a couple different things. I want to kind of compartmentalize the different types of death that we deal with, because some are much easier to process than others. For instance, like with my dad, it sucks as my dad, and I was 18, I was a child, but because I had time to say goodbye, it's an easier process. With Mike, we had time to say goodbye. We got to see him several times, and we knew that he was at peace. We know he's at peace. So when you have somebody that's dealing with an illness where they're getting a little bit more time, there's all the emotions. For me personally, like I said, it's heavier until they actually pass, and then a lot of times you still go through all the different stages of grief. You have your anger, which we can talk about anger as well, the sadness, the denial, all of that. But with the officers being shot or killed in the line of duty, that is a harder pill to swallow. And then we'll go into the suicide piece, and we'll go a little bit heavier, and then we're going to bring it up. So, because I want to make sure people are getting tools to process this stuff with. So you guys didn't really have great support or resources when you dealt with these in the line of duty situations. So I know, Chris, you had to seek out external support, and that kind of led you on the path of where we're at now. So do you want to talk a little bit about what you found that worked for you?
Yeah, well, my agency, they had debriefs. Two of the officers that were killed in the line of duty were from my agency. The other two were from a different agency. So they didn't really offer debriefs for that. But I never told them that I knew the other officers from the other agency. So I can't fault my agency for that. That's all on me. A debrief is only as good as you want it to be, and so an agency can offer a debrief, but it doesn't mean everybody's going to participate. They might be there, they might be present, but not everybody's going to talk. And some people, for whatever reason, it could be anger, it could be frustration, it could be they just don't want to speak, because if they speak, emotions might start to come out. So to play it safe, they just stay quiet. In my case, things just got too overwhelming for me in my career that I had to go seek out professional help. And we have counseling services within the agency, but I didn't want to go to somebody that was within the agency. I wanted somebody outside. And because there were some, sessions where tears came out. And for me, it was easier for me to accept me being able to cry in a psychiatrist's office, separate from the police department, not in the police department. Because then I know I'm not being judged. Yes, our agency had peer support. Yes, our agency had counselors. But for me at that time, I didn't want to show any kind of emotion. I definitely don't want to cry in front of them, because I felt like I would be judged by them. And I was probably completely wrong, right, in assuming that. But how many of us think that? So, for those agencies out there, if you have an outside entity that your officers and deputies can go to, I'd highly recommend that, because I think it's easier, one, to be able to just be completely honest in a session outside of the PD. So that's what I went through, and I was in bad shape at that time, where I would have to go see a psychiatrist twice a week, every week. That's a lot of sessions, but that shows you how in bad a shape I was. And with time, it became once a week, then it became every other week. And before you know it, it was just once a month, right? That's how I showed that I was actually making some progress. And even at that month period, I remember thinking, I don't need to continue with these sessions anymore, because I'm good. And at that time I was married, and my wife at the time said, well, why don't you just keep going? What's the harm in that? And that advice is actually, that was some sound advice, because every month I would go, even though I didn't think I would need it. And guess what the topic of conversation would be? It would be about death, all the death cases that I went, responded to. And it just so happened that on this particular year, we had a major call where a guy killed his entire family, one of which was a baby. And I was the first officer on scene. And several officers that responded to that scene actually took medical retirements. And because it was a very, very bad scene to be at, I just happened to have an appointment with that psychiatrist. I think it was the previous week. And guess what we talked about? We talked about that incident. And so that helped me, because I already had somebody on standby, right? I already had a session booked, and that actually felt perfect. And I think that helped me maintain a certain level of balance, just having that resource there. I didn't have to Google somebody and 10,000 options come up of a psychiatrist. Now I got to choose one. Now I've got to figure out who's the best one, and are they taking new clients, and how long is their wait period, right? I didn't have that. I already had somebody. Tami, go ahead.
Well, and that's one of the things I want to hammer in. We hammer in our trainings that we put on, is to have a therapist, a coach, somebody, peer support, somebody that you are talking to, a professional that you're talking to when you're good. It doesn't, for us with coaching, like, it doesn't have to be an hour-long session with us with a clipboard being like, going into the depths. It's just like, hey, let's do a 15-minute check-in, make sure you're good. Because when you start having those relationships, you've already started doing your mental and emotional wellness, and you're checking in with people. Then if and when something does hit the fan, which we're human, shit can happen like that. So it's good to already have built a trusting relationship, have the rapport with someone that you can immediately say, hey, I need you. And that way, it's like you said, it's if you don't have anything, if you've never done therapy, you've never worked with a coach, you've never worked with anybody, you're just, getting through it. When things get rough, it's most of the time it's hard just to get out of bed. It's just trying to put your thoughts together. You're not going to willingly go and seek out that external support. Cory, I'm going to come back to you, because you turned to alcohol. And were you already did you drink, or was that something that you just tell me a little bit of your experience, I guess, whatever you're willing.
Well, my mom was a drinker, and she had COPD, so she we knew she was dying. And, I would bond with her like that. We'd have drinks at dinner or whatever. And then, when she was gone, it just continued. It was really the only thing I knew at that time. So that's what made me feel good. And that's what helped me block it out. And, life was good with alcohol. But eventually, you can only do it for so long before things start to fall apart.
Yeah. And for people that don't know, I owned a bar on Maui for years. And so I always say I was a life coach before I was ever a life coach, because I was a bartender. So everybody came in. We had first responders would come in, the nurses. I always stayed open until the last minute so that my night crew people could come in and talk, because there's nobody to talk to at night. And that's something else that we want to advocate for, is when you have your team of support or your friends, you need to know who you can reach out to at 3 a.m. Because those nights, that's when the voices get louder, the world gets quieter, and it's harder to make it through. And I think that's a good pivot point to go into the suicide conversation. With the people, Mike, you lost someone. Have we all lost somebody to suicide? You haven't? I have. Cory, have you lost to suicide?
No.
Mike, was yours during the day or at night?
So my captain's I was actually on vacation on a cruise, so I didn't find out about it until literally I walked off the cruise, turned on my phone. So it had already happened. And then when I got back to my department, I helped organize a debrief. The other two, one of them I found out because I was on our peer support team, and we're on call 24/7, but I wasn't on call the night of when my one friend committed suicide. And one of the other supervisors called me during the night to tell me. So I found out pretty quick after it happened. And I don't remember the other time when I found out. I think it was during the day.
Chris?
Well, I was a teenager at that time, so I wasn't even in law enforcement, but it's just one of those, I really don't remember when I heard, of, my friends killing themselves, but I remember the impact and how much it weighed on me, because it was like, man, I'm never going to see them again. Right? They're just like gone. Like 1 minute they're here, the next just gone. And I think dealing with that, and 3 of them before the age of 17, in a way, just for my own self-preservation, I kind of just didn't think too much into it, because if I thought too much, it would put me in that really dark place. So in a way, I kind of created this wall, this barrier, to where, okay, I'm not going to think about them anymore, and I'm just going to continue with life. And it helped, but you got to grieve. You got to let it go. You got to release it. Otherwise, you can become really cold. And I think I kind of was like that early in my life. I was very cold and non-feeling. So I've really warmed up in my old age. So I'm a lot more approachable. But I think back then, it just dealing with that so early in life kind of affected me as an adult.
I think Chris has a good point, is especially being that young, he had no tools
Right.
on how to deal with it. Just like, my mom might have been, or I might have been in my 30s when my mom died, but I still didn't have those tools. If you don't have them, you're going to either block it or you're going to find a way to block it.
Mike?
Oh, I was going to say, as a wellness coordinator, it's really important to remember those anniversaries of when those happen and to do follow-up and check-ins. My one friend, he went to a pretty popular event in San Diego. It's called Taco Fest, and they've been broadcasting that on the radio. It happened in August. So they've been promoting this Taco Fest, and it triggers me. Like every time I hear it on the radio, it just brings me back to that night when, the circumstances, he went to that, and it was later that night, early in the morning. But yeah, just again, as a wellness coordinator, as a police department, a peer support, if there's ways you could write those events, even critical incidents, any kind of big events like that, marking down the anniversary and then reaching out to those people when that anniversary comes up.
I think that's great. Reaching out to, because with suicide, I understand somebody that commits suicide, the pain is so much, it's so overwhelming that really to them, it's the only solution. Other times I know that some of the mindset is almost like a hero's mindset, where they feel like they are doing their friends and family a favor, that they are in such a bad way. It's actually, especially in first responder field, it's their way of protecting their friends and family, because they get themselves into such a dark space. If anybody's watching this that has, is thinking or has thought about committing suicide, it doesn't take the pain away. All it does, the way I explain it, is it's like shrapnel to everybody that you care about. It hurts everybody. And like Cory said, Kristen had the tools. When I was graduating high school, we had a classmate who was a year younger than us. He had a breakup, and he drank down a couple bottles of NyQuil, I believe, to my recollection, and he went and jumped in the river and passed out and drowned, and they hadn't found him. So our high school graduation was bittersweet. We were graduating, but we also had this person. I came from a very small school, so we knew him very well, missing. And so we were dealing with that. And then about, I think, 2 years after graduation, one of our classmates hung herself. And so right out into the adult life, my entire class, we were all impacted by very close suicides. And that still affects all of us to this day. It's been over 20 years. And then we had another friend who, I know 2 of my very good friends, they got a call from him the night that he decided to kill himself. and they didn't answer. So now 20 years later, they're living with that guilt that if I would have just picked up the phone. But what we need to realize is that if somebody's if they've gotten to the point that they are going to kill themselves, there's nothing that the rest of us can do to change that. They've made up their mind. And Chris, without going into the details of the call you responded to, but just kind of talking about how the thought process, are you tracking where I'm going with this?
No. What call are you talking about?
The teenage.
Which one?
The girl. Tree.
I
want to give.
Well, we talk about loss of loved ones, loss of people that we work with, our coworkers, our friends, right, in the line of duty death. But we also deal with loss with the calls that we respond to. And, being a homicide detective, I responded to many calls where young lives were lost, some of which were suicide, some of which were homicide, some of which were accidental. And to me, as a new dad, the deaths of kids really weighed heavy on me. And I think I carried those cases here and in my heart much more than any other case, right? Because I'm a dad. And, there are those cases where I can think of, a teenager, 15-year-old teenager who committed suicide. I can think of a 2-month-old baby who accidentally was smothered to death, right? These are cases that I worked on that I didn't process properly. And I buried it in here, but it was always there. And we have to be really careful not to carry those with us to the point where they're in our forefront and we're always thinking about these individuals. We can do our job, we can do our investigation, but we have to be careful we don't carry that with us in our daily life, because it will affect us. It will affect how we interact with our family. It will affect how we interact with our coworkers and also with the public. So for me, because even, I retired, I had a homicide case from like 2016, 2017. I retired in 2021. And in 2022, I was notified we have a trial of that case. Well, I haven't thought about that case in years, and I've been retired for at least a year, maybe even going on 2 at that time. And now I've got to remember everything. That case, I had to go back to the PD. I had to pull the case file, all the evidence, and now I had to really immerse myself into this time period of when I was dealing with my own stuff. So guess what happened? I went back into my whole body, emotionally. I was reliving everything. And this is where law enforcement, this is why we're so special, is most people, they say, I want to forget this, I want to forget that. Well, we in law enforcement, we can't forget that stuff, if you think about it, because at any point we might be asked to come back to trial. We might be asked to come and do a defense interview. So we're trained to remember those little things, right? So I guess my point is, how do we not carry that with us if at any moment we could be asked to go testify? And what I did was I created, I don't have it with me, but I created this, like, a journal. And what I visualize is all of my homicide cases, all of my really bad cases are in this journal, right? And the case number and the details of that case. And what I do is I visualize a library. And if you look at I got a bunch of books in my own personal library of, self-improvement books. And so what I do is I put that book that represents all of my cases, I put it in that library and I keep it there. And even mentally, I think about that. If in here, it's all those cases are in this mental book, and it's now placed in this library with millions of other books on self-improvement, positive books. But the reason I do that is because I want to put those experiences someplace where I don't need it in the forefront of my thinking. However, if ever I get called upon to testify or to do whatever regarding one of those cases, then I can just pull that journal out, and now I can open it and I can refer back to it, right? but I don't have to live every day thinking about that little 2-month-old or that 15-year-old that committed suicide or this or that. That is my way of being able to put all that bad stuff into one location, and I can put it someplace, because we can never really forget that kind of stuff. It's always going to be there somewhere in the subconscious. So I don't want to get too long-winded, but what are your thoughts? How do you guys deal with that kind of stuff so that it doesn't come back? Because I know, Greg, you dealt with a really bad case involving Boy Scouts. How do you keep that in check?
And I think that is was put in check, and I keep that in check by talking and counseling and just getting some outside help and having people that I can talk to, like a coach or a therapist, and get that emotion out so that I can deal with it. And grief is a difficult processing grief is a difficult topic to begin with, and we all experience it, especially as first responders. We see much more death in our career than most people will ever see in their lifetimes, and not just somebody that died of a heart attack. We're talking some pretty bad stuff, whether it's a violent traffic accident or shooting or stabbing or whatever, what have you, and trying to process all of that grief is what I think we really need to get the departments to recognize. They need to help. They need to help process. Even if it was just you responded to a homicide scene, you need to be able to let your people talk, and without any fear of retribution, or if they cry, they cry, and it doesn't matter. We've got to lose that stigma that you can't cry or they think you're weak, and you need to be able to help process through those. My experience has been that when I finally did have someone to talk to, I could process through those emotions and keep everything in check where it should be. Get it out, unbury all of those feelings that have been buried over 31 years, and get those out on the table, and feel much better about myself, and get through that grieving process. And like I said, family's tough. I rely heavily on my faith. In the line of duty, deaths are very difficult. And even now, Tami had mentioned, even now seeing, an in the line of duty death, having been retired now for 7 or 8 years, it still triggers me a little bit. But one of the things that I was never going to do, to all the cop funerals that I've ever been to, whether they were my close friends or they were just a cop that worked in our area, we went to the funerals, and cop funerals are really hard, and I wasn't going to cry, and I watched everybody else, and none of the guys, family was crying, but you rarely see, unless they were on the squad of the person that was killed, you rarely see anybody else cry. And boy, my emotions, when I finally got to my own private place, my emotions would come out, and it would sure have been nice to have somebody to talk to help get those emotions out. But I wasn't gonna show those emotions in public, or where somebody else would see me in law enforcement and think, well, that guy's, he's weak, he can't even handle it, that kind of thing. So talking, and we always come back to the same thing. You need to have somebody to talk to. You need to have that in place. You need to be able to know that you can call somebody at 3 a.m. You need to be able to know that they're going to help support you and just let you vent and get through those emotions.
So I have a little bit of a pivot. I have a question for you guys. Throughout your careers, how much, if any, training were you provided to how to deliver death notices to families?
None. And if you've never delivered a death notification, those are miserable. That's one of the hardest things to do in law enforcement, is to knock on somebody's door and tell them that they've lost a family member. I've had people collapse. I've had people pass out. I've had people grab onto me screaming and crying. And I don't know why, but it seemed like I was always the one that had to do the death notifications. And I've done way too many, and with zero training. They call you and say, go tell this person their kid died.
And you guys have all said a few key words where, like, Greg, you would not allow yourself to cry, and you guys came up in that era where it wasn't okay. I think it's a little different now, but when you're on a call, if you're the one that's having to go give that notice, just like a doctor in the hospital, you have to have, it's such a hard balance because you have to keep your emotions in check. You have to stay neutral. But a lot of times, Chris, you said it, you were cold in the beginning. And it's very easy, especially for first responders and cops, to get desensitized, to get into autopilot RoboCop mode and have zero sympathy, and realizing like it's that family's worst day of their life, especially if it's a kid. And so to deliver it with a straight face, some officers, I think, need to understand, like, yes, you have to do your job. There's protocols in place, but remembering the humanness of it when you're delivering that information. And then if you're delivering, see, this is where I come in again, debriefs. If you're delivering death notifications to families, you need to be getting with your peer support. I'm gonna yell at the internet right now. Peer support needs to go to their officers that they know delivered a death notification, pull them aside, and debrief on it. Ah!
I agree.
And I don't know, maybe agencies today have death notification training for all their officers, not just for, because on the homicide unit, I did get briefly trained on it, and maybe a 1 or 2 hour class. But from a patrol standpoint, I never did get one of those. So because there are some things that you have to think about when giving a death notification, because there are going to be emotions that fly. And I remember doing one where a police agency killed a suspect, a knife wielding suspect, in our town, and myself and another detective were tasked with going and notifying next of kin. Now think about that. We're going to go notify this person's family that they were killed by other police officers, right? And so we went and gave that notification, and the mom reacted like any mom would. That she got really upset, and she asked, "Well, how did he die?" And we told her, and so she became very angry. She became angry at us, and she picked up a phone, called her loved ones, and was saying the police murdered so and so. And so of course she's bad mouthing the police. And at that moment you can't take that stuff personal. You just can't, because she's grieving and she just lost her loved one. And she can say as much bad things about us as she wants. I'm not taking it personal. The detective that was with me, we didn't take it personal, but we asked her if she needed anything from us. And of course she's, wasn't the nicest person, rightfully so, I guess, and we left. But that really stands out to me, because it's like, to get that type of death notification when, it turned out it was justified. We all know that it was a justified shooting, but to give that type of notification to a family member when law enforcement took that family member's life is even more difficult. So something to think about. But I hope that agencies are giving training to their officers on doing proper death notifications.
Well, and the reason I asked is because I just spoke with multiple agencies, and it's the same. There's zero training right now. So, it bothers me when it turns against cops and they have all these issues, and then there's these things where it's like there is a huge disconnect and a miscommunication and a misunderstanding that could easily be rectified. And part of that starts with that's an easy one that departments, and if there is a department that's watching this and said, hey, we do training for that, please, by all means, reach out to us so that we can help connect you with these other departments. Because from my understanding, on the wide majority, there is not sufficient training. And this is a very important one that should have the most compassionate training. Cory hopped off. We're in the middle of Mercury retrograde. It's just technical difficulties, and we're going to fly with it. So as we wrap this up a little bit, let's bring up the energy. It's a heavy topic, and we knew that going in. And it comes down to, we all know we need to be talking. I'm going to just kind of throw it again to peer support. And even if your department's small and you don't have peer support, but connecting and really working with surrounding departments and utilizing their peer support, having the peer support come in, sending your wellness people to any and every training. I know, Mike, you're on top of the game with the wellness training. So let's kind of talk about how we can support the department and then the individual level on some of those resources.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I tell my people is to try to find 3 to 5 people that we kind of talked about it earlier that you trust. And a lot of time that's a neutral kind of person. So for me personally, those 3 to 5 people, it's a couple of chaplains. It's a bunch of guys from my church that we meet on a regular basis every Monday night, is creating that circle of trust that you could talk to. Peer support's great, but it's not for everyone. Like, let's be honest. I mean, my own friends have told me, no offense, but I wouldn't go to our peer support. And I have to respect that, as a peer support coordinator, a wellness coordinator, and it's my job to have a resource for them. So I better find them one. And there's resources out there, but, peer support's not the end all be all. Same with debriefs. They're awesome. That's just a starting point. Like, we have to keep, with the follow-ups, once a month checkup, whatever that is. Again, there's a lot of resources, but as cops, I think sometimes we're nervous or we don't trust these resources. So that can be hard.
And Cory's coming back in, so I'm going to just pause for 1 second and let him back in. All right.
Well, I want to piggyback a little bit on what Mike said, and as far as helping with the agencies, I've never been to, and I've been to a lot of critical incidences where there's been death, destruction, just terrible, terrible incidences. I've never personally been to one where peer support actually came out. If I was lucky, I was asked by the supervisor, do you want to talk to anybody? No. Okay, great. That's what I wanted to hear. And they leave it at that. Peer support needs to be more proactive. They can't just wait for the sergeant to call. They can't just wait for something. They need to, if they hear about a death notification that somebody had to go do or a critical incident that a team was on, they need to reach out. They don't wait for those people to come to you. They need to go to them. They need to go out to that briefing or that next shift when that team's in briefing and see if anybody wants to talk then. Because if they were more accessible, if they were more involved, I think you would get more participation. I think you would see more active conversations if they would just reach out a little bit. Our peer support seemed to be, they were on call 24/7, but you never heard from them. You never heard from them. They never responded out to anything that I saw. And even afterwards, okay, a couple of days later, you're going to hear about the 4 Boy Scouts drowning in the river. You're going to hear about that. Well, you need to find that team and go out to their briefing and try to talk to them individually or whatever you need to do to see if they need to talk, because they need to talk. And it's not going to be the easiest thing to get them to talk, but they need to talk and they need to process those emotions and those feelings. So peer support needs to be a little bit more aggressive and more forward than what I've witnessed in my career.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Greg. Peer support should take that proactive role into reaching out, and depending on the types of calls, because again, it's nice to know that there's somebody there that you can talk to. I would I would caution peer support. This is just my own opinion. I would caution peer support from going to some of these active scenes, because I can remember, a case from my old agency where a baby was left in a hot vehicle, and in summertime here in Arizona, I mean, we can reach 120 degrees outside, and peer support responded out there. Now, you would think that's a good thing, right? Peer support responded to the scene. The problem with that, though, is peer support is now becoming part of the scene. They're now experiencing everything that's happening out there. So now they're going to have to be debriefed, and because they're human beings just like us, they're going to experience that trauma as well. And now, how can you help these officers if you're experiencing the same trauma that they're experiencing? So I would caution peer support. You can listen to it, hear it on the radio, and then make arrangements after the fact to reach out to these officers. But be very cautious about responding to a scene, because the moment you step foot out there, you're now exposed. You're now exposed to everything that's happening out there. But I agree with you. They should be more proactive. Listen to the radio, and an agency might even want to designate certain calls for service will be forwarded to peer support for them to determine whether or not they're going to respond.
Mike?
Yeah, and just one note on that. I have firsthand experience with that. The department needs to make that protocol where it takes that decision out of their hands. Yeah. If X, Y, and Z happens, if there's an OIS, critical incident, and you could come up with that as a department. I think we all kind of know which ones those are. The watch commander has to make those calls. And unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't happen. Somebody's like, oh, I don't need peer support. Let peer support set up shop somewhere, either at a POA, a more neutral site. Chris, you have a great point on that. Maybe back at headquarters. Hey, Mike and the peer support team is going to be at headquarters. There's also going to be a chaplain. Set up kind of like a triage. And then if nobody needs it right there and then, that's fine. But the follow-up has to happen, because everybody might look around and be like, oh, everybody seems good. I guess I'm supposed to be good. And they're not. And that's right. Why the follow-up has to happen.
And that's such a important point, because we will go, we'll follow the crowd. Chris just showed me a video of an experiment where they had two signs and there was a right answer. It's like, are the lines the same or different? And they had the actors in the line being like, oh, they went to this one. And you watch, people will just follow and they won't critical think. They won't do their own thing. There was only one person in the line that was like, you guys are all wrong. I'm going to go stand by myself. But when it comes to, especially within a culture, especially if your job could be on the line, or just how people are perceiving you, if the majority is not saying, hey, I need to talk about this, but the majority is like, no, I'm good, then the person that's needing it the most will say, I'm good. And there's a couple different parts to that. So yes, departments need to mandate. There needs to be protocols. And when it comes to debriefs and wellness, it's easier for a department, and not just mandating a once a year wellness check-in. You need to mandate it so that it's taking away the choice, so that people are like, you can kind of hide behind, well, I had to do it. I had to talk to a therapist. I had to talk to a coach, and that's okay. The other thing, I have so many thoughts on all of this. And I totally lost my train of thought. So I'm going to throw it. I'm going to come back to it in a second. Cory, did you have anything Chris?
I was going to say, you're talking about the herd mentality. We'll follow the herd. Mm-hmm. And that one person that's like thinking different from the herd begins to question, wait, am I the one that's wrong and everybody else is right? And that's not the case, right? Because we all want to be a part of a group. In a debrief, to do a debrief, you got 10 officers that responded to this incident. If you don't have the proper protocols in place of this is mandatory debriefing, you're going to have somebody ask, hey, do you need a debrief? No. 9 times out of 10, 9 of those officers are going to say, no, I don't need it. Reality is they probably do need it, right? But again, nobody wants to be that one person that says yes. So we have to make it easy for them. And in policy, designate these specific calls will require some sort of debrief. You don't have to make anybody participate, but they will be there, right? They don't have to talk, but at least they can be there and they can hear what's happening. They can hear different perspectives. Yeah, Mike.
And just real quick on that, Chris, you're totally right. And what I'm seeing with my department is the old school guys, the sergeants, are leading by example. and they're telling their people, they're not making it mandatory, but you need to come to this. And all the people that come to it, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I went to that. I didn't know so-and-so did that during the incident. That helped me kind of get some closure. But yeah, it's kind of leading by example, changing that culture. And I feel like it's starting to happen where, I mean, the debriefs we have at my department, I've never seen that many people at debriefs ever. Sometimes we would have nobody show up. So it's helping. We're moving in the right direction.
And I remembered what I was going to say. So I think it's important too that if you have something happen, you do the debrief immediately so that the people can all know, hey, here's your people that understand what you're going through. You're not alone, and you can talk, and whoever needs to talk can be there. But knowing that if it's within the first 48 hours, these people are in active trauma. And when you're in active trauma, you process things differently. Your fight or flight, everything's still going, and you haven't had full time to process it. So I would say it's super important for departments to do a debrief. For the wellness professionals, whether it's peer support or the therapist or whoever that is, touch base. But then the follow-up 2 weeks, I would say, but within the month, but a couple weeks later, to come around and do another either debrief or a personal reach out, because now they've had time to process. And that's when stuff's going to be like, you know what? I haven't actually been able to think straight. I haven't been able to sleep. I noticed that I'm a little bit crankier. That's when the processing is going to start, and they can actually get somewhere with a mental health professional. My 2 cents. All right, Cory, did you want to throw anything else in there?
I was just going to add, we had really good success in Colorado. Victim advocates were a really big thing with the state. So we had a resource of victim advocates. So we would bring the victim advocate along for death notifications. And that seemed to work really well because they're trained for that kind of, news.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be awesome to take a counselor with you to make a death notification. Like, yeah, I would have loved that.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So again, as we're wrapping this up, what are just some positive things that you guys have found to help you move through grief and loss and come out of it, feeling like you've got some sense of peace or whatever that may be? We'll start with Greg.
Well, I'm always going to lean first on my faith, and that helps me get through a lot of, especially the family. Losing my uncle a few weeks ago, it was a very sad time, but I leaned very strongly on my faith to get through those things. But you just have to talk. Have to find somebody to talk to. Find somebody to help you process the emotions. And I was going to say, find somebody outside of law enforcement, but if you don't have any, just find somebody that you can talk to and help you to be able to get those emotions out and move forward.
Mike?
Yeah, for me, it's just having those neutral mentors that I could trust, chaplains, and again, my men's group from my church and the pastors from my church. They have been my go-to when times are tough and when times are good. I could always reach out to them, and sometimes, again, just like Greg said, sometimes it's just talking about it to someone you feel comfortable and you feel better. The loss is still there; that's never going to go away, but you're able to handle it a little bit better, I think.
Cory, you?
Don't run from it. Whatever you need to do to celebrate that person or deal with the issues that you're feeling inside. Some people might want to go do a 5K to go celebrate that person, or someone might want to go talk to a therapist. But I think whatever it's going to be, you got to deal with the issue head on and make forward progress instead of that backwards progress.
Chris?
Yeah, I like Cory, celebrate that person. And I think that's so significant. We celebrate the time that we had with them while they're here. And one of the things that I personally do is I've lost all of these people, but I don't mourn for them. I know it sounds kind of weird. I celebrate them, like Cory said. And how do I celebrate them? Well, part of it is creating law enforcement coaching, creating the stuff that we teach, And by doing that, that's my way of keeping their memory alive and keeping, because I went through that. I experienced it. I experienced their loss. So by me doing this, I'm helping other officers. I'm helping officers' families, and in turn helping communities as well by providing this service. So I don't want to sit here and say, woe is me, I lost them. No. I'm creating this to help others in their memory. So celebrate them. That's huge for me.
I love that. You got
Tami?
choked me up on that one. With that, so there's no right or wrong way to mourn somebody. If you're pissed off, then you're pissed off. That's part of the stage of grief.
I was just going to say, if you're going to be pissed off,
Exactly.
and that's okay. But then you're going to have your day to move forward.
Exactly. And as long as you do move forward, because some people hold on to stuff, and that, if it's not, the thing is, when we pass and we transition on, everything goes back to love and light, and your significant others don't want you grieving and being sad. They want you to live your life. I think that's one of the key takeaways. And celebrating what Chris said, law enforcement coaching would not exist if it weren't for me losing my dad. I'm doing this in part to honor him, to honor his legacy. I bring him up in almost every training we talk to because he is a driving force. He may not be here in human form, but if he was, we wouldn't have as close of a relationship as we do now as him in spirit form guiding. And for some that may resonate, but for others, take it for whatever it is. We all have our own spiritual and religious beliefs, but knowing your people are very much with you, you just need to kind of lean in and tune into that, whatever your faith is. And if you're having a disconnect from faith, reach out and talk to somebody, and again, there's no right or wrong, and there's no expiration date on how long it's going to take you to process. If you lose a child, that's going to be something that you're going to be processing for the rest of your life, but that doesn't mean that you stop living your life. You live for that person, right? So with all of that said, thank you guys all for being here. It's a heavier topic. For those that, tuned in, hopefully you took something away from this. And if you are dealing with a loss of someone and you need somebody to talk to, our whole team's here. Reach out to your community, your support. And if we do have somebody that's watching this that has been contemplating suicide, please reach out to whoever that is. We are absolutely here. Suicide hotlines, your departments, your peer support. Please make sure you don't pass that pain shrapnel to others, but you check in with yourself and take care of yourself. And to everyone, we send you all love and healing and all of the good vibes, and continue to pay it forward and help others move through their process. So with that, thank you all for being here. Until next week.